And now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to what is possibly one of the big ones. Because over the last couple of days, we've spent a considerable amount of time sort of discussing the ramifications of Chris's very, very poor financial decisions. Because Chris's entire history to a point has been a myriad of bad financial decisions, really, really, really bad decisions generally, but also I've talked about a lack of rational thought. I've talked about a lack of learning, but we're also going to use a very exclusive phrase that I just like, as I think it sounds cool, of precognition. Now, the idea of precognition, guys, is that you learn from you see you have this lobe on the back of your head that's responsible for pretty much the whole of your memories. It's what's referred to as the process is called adult neurogenesis. It is the foundations for everything you know, everything you've learned, asleep or awake. It is basically like the SD card that I have in my camera. It stores all the information, it stores the dates, it stores everything you could possibly need, and when you need it, it is there. It's there somehow or in some way or shape or form. I speak this in relation to Chris because precognition is sort of where your mind goes, now hang on a minute, hang on a minute, Chris. We've been here before. They say that they're authentic. They say that they are generally interested in Sonichu. They say they are generally interested in you. But you've never asked them why or what attracts them to Sonichu. Like imagine like the role of thought as something like a flow chart. Does this go like me? Yes or no, and then it sort of like branches off. It's actually quite a good system to follow in terms of trying to understand decision making, because you have to consider the actions that you do. You have to live with the consequences of what you do, whether they are good. There are good consequences and there are bad consequences. It's just unfortunately the large majority of decisions Chris has made throughout his life, the consequences have been, let's say, less than favorable, as this article will prove. And finally, we spent quite a bit of time in the last video talking about Chris's accumulative debt, and Barbara's as well. But the biggest takeaway that I got from that article was that it didn't make any impression on Chris whatsoever, which I must say is extremely disappointing in my opinion, because if I was in debt to nearly $15,000, I literally would not be able to sleep at night. I think that sort of thing would literally give me panic attacks. Because, as I said before, debt is a cancer and it will not stop until you are eaten alive. With that being said, however, there might be another operative phrase we might be using throughout this article, and that is crises management. And just before we begin, I'll just explain this briefly in my interpretation of crisis management. Crisis management is a system in place when things absolutely go to pot. And this could be from a business point of view, when, let's say, a hard drive, for example, needs to be there's no choice, but it needs to be replaced, and that sort of thing could carry valuable information that is priceless. And well, how do you start off again when that sort of thing is compromised, damaged, formatted in any way? So you have to respond to stuff like that immediately. Or it could be in the case of things like, because I've expressed for the last 3 weeks that I've had a crisis management in terms of my dad suffering from a stroke a week before the Carabao Cup final, and he's been in hospital like nearly 10. He could easily be going back in tomorrow for all we know, because his situation is very erratic and very unpredictable. So in situations like that, you've sort of got to work out, how are you going to sort this out? What sacrifices are you going to have to make to make sure that things don't go, because in a crisis you have to do everything in your power to make sure that things do not go from worse to completely irreversible. And the impact the Financhu crisis certainly had, it certainly left ineradicable after effects in Chris's pocket. I would say the idea guys left more ineradicable after effects on Chris's psyche and his sense of reality. But it's hard to say really, because to be honest, I feel like Chris is his. Then again, it will also be offset by something I will mention at the very end of this. In fact, I'll tell you what. I'll mention it now, and I'll mention it again at the end. How about we do that? Chris can solve this, and I'm dead serious about that. Chris could actually solve his debts. Chris can actually reverse. You know what? Chris learned all of these things from the idea guys. He can unlearn them too. That is, if Chris is willing to play ball. But I think we already know how that's turned out. But with all that being said, now we can finally begin. The Financhu crisis. I do not feel I would be mentally suited for an application required. Long waits to be contacted or not contact. Am I hired yet? Under the man freaking job. Stop telling me to get a job. God. Chris, April 2017, after his friends on Facebook refused to entertain his nonsensical excuses for not having a job. Also, truly bad intentions of spamming actual hate speech. Get a job. A few things we're going to have to go over here, guys, and this is going to be a pretty long one, so strap yourselves in. Yes, listen, I've also been in many situations before when I've attended interviews and the interviewee, the interviewer, I should say, they have told me that my application will go to a review committee and I should be talked back. I should receive a message in kind in 7 to 10 working days, and when and they even failed to do that even after I was told that's exactly what they would be doing. And I've even raised stuff like that before, and it is true. The responses I got were sort of in the ballpark of, oh yeah, the review committee's dealing with all that. I got the impression that they didn't really understand they didn't really understand sort of what my concerns were, because listen, if they were going to if my application was going to a review committee including my interview, and they told me that I was going to get back to in 7 to 10 working days, you know what? I could say fair enough. If they need a little bit more time to deliberate, then that's fine. The problem I have, though, is, well, you could probably work out as well. If it's not going to be ready in 7 to 10 working days, then don't say things that may not be true, but don't give people false hope either. You've got to give people the cold hard facts, because that's just because if you don't do that, you're liable to seem sort of what the Burmese would call shock day. And you wouldn't want to work for a business that is shock day. And shock day, by the way, means approximately untrustworthy. And you don't want to work for a place that is untrustworthy, because if they're going to advertise a job at all, then ideally, then they will want to hire somebody that they want to will be able to do the job. They'll be able to make sure that you're competent and you're secure and you're safe and stuff like that. And the way they do that is you build a level of trust which says that, should be almost contracted in stone, that we will tell you whether or not you got the job or not, based on these preliminary decisions, which should be mandated. I'm absolutely going to be saying about that, because it's one thing to say that you're going to be told. It's another thing when you respond, when your response to when you're called out on when you don't do it is that you don't really seem to understand what's going on. And why? But then again, I've also worked in places where I have been responded to, and guess what? It's not personal. Don't get me wrong or anything like that, but if we are going to go under the assumption that there are some places are better to work at than others, and I've worked at plenty of places during my time that the environment and the conditions are certainly better than others. But then again, trying to suggest the idea that getting a job is considered hate speech is, well, you want to know why it's not considered hate speech, in my opinion? Because, well, have you not tried it though, Chris? And remember, the last time Chris actually applied for a job was all the way back in 2009, and if Chris actually had decided to take this route, then we wouldn't end up in this situation. I'm just saying, Chris, is that you reap what you sow, and if you did try and do that, you wouldn't find yourself in this ugly situation, because, as I mentioned before, being in debt is a very, very ugly business, and it's not something anybody should even discover the hard way, because if you could avoid it as much as possible, then there's that. But considering Chris didn't, well, is it any wonder why we're having this conversation? Now we can actually get started. The Financhu crisis is a term coined by users from Kiwi farms to describe the steep decline in the Chandler's family financial management beginning in early 2016. Signs of the Chandlers' worsening finances were made apparent by the increasing amounts of begging videos and donation requests on YouTube and Facebook. In June of 2017, Chris began to take his Patreon account more seriously and recommended drawing Sonichu comic pages. He has gotten several $100s per month for his efforts, and payments continued until the 2nd of August 2021, when his Patreon account was shut down. As a result, begging had temporarily subsided. Also because Chris was a little preoccupied with being doing Bird at the time. Better than doing Bob, I suppose. In mid-2018, however, begging resumed, due to an alleged extortion plot by the Idea Guys, which involved threatening to destroy Chris's imaginary land, Quickville, if he did not pay them. It is claimed by the God Dogs group that Chris had paid the Idea Guys around $6,000 in the form of gift cards and video game accessories. You know, I think I've also made a point about this, and it's, again, every time I come back to hearing the phrases like destroying Chris's imaginary world and Chris just giving away over nearly $6,000, it would lead me to suggest the idea that, well, Chris is either insane to the point of there should have been some intervention by the state by this point, or even by Greene County's sheriff or anything like that. But I'm also concerned about the fact that, well, Stephen Boyd and Joshua Wise never received any real consequences from this whatsoever, outside of being made rather infamous for what they've done. They never faced prison time. They were never, they were never forced to give the money back, and, well, another Chris and the effects that they left in Chris's mind as well. It's sort of pretty much how we got here, and I will be discussing the Idea Guys at some point, don't get me wrong, but just so you know, well, it's one thing to say you play into Chris's delusions, but also Chris just gave them away without a second thought, without Chris thinking that you need money to live and buy groceries, buy shopping, pay off your mortgage and stuff like that. It kind of makes me wonder, well, I wonder who's even more at fault. The idea that, well, Chris just decided to do this and getting his priorities wrong, or the people who thought it was foolish enough to give Chris money in the first place. Because it's almost wasted entirely on Chris at this point, wouldn't you say? Chris and Bob were left on the brink of foreclosure, and Chris repeatedly claimed to need assistance without buying enough food for his family. Chris stopped caring about the Financhu crisis by 2019 because of the dimensional merge and the generous backing from Ali Hirschberg and other financial enablers. Chris continues to beg, but only for conventions, which he'll probably never get into again after what happened with Bob, toys, and video games. Chris now believes he has a vast wealth in Dimension C197 to pay off the creditors, but creditors do not buy into fictional worlds and have managed to sue him for at least $11,606.15 as of the 23rd of February 2022. Chris has access to Bob's online bank account and knows how to transfer her money into his own account. During the incest saga fallout, he admitted to taking $750 from Bob's account to fund a hotel room for himself. Given that Bob is an elderly on a fixed income, and Chris was lazy on a fixed income, it is unsurprising that many followers worried that the death of Bob could lead to the so-called homeless saga, a wet dream for A-loggers and weens everywhere, but devastating for both Chris and his many of his followers. Owing to Chris's arrest on incest charges, his Patreon has been terminated, although financial enablers continue to send him money to his jail inmate account while he was incarcerated. And also, even if it's not a thing that's actually mentioned in this article, Chris continues to live stream quite regularly on YouTube. He even did a what's the word? Like a media share stream in which people would donate nearly 33 cents a second to send Chris a video to watch and stuff like that, and it resulted in a lot of ween attempts in sending Chris clips of My Little Pony Generation 5 that Chris hates, and Chris just shrieks and goes la 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 whenever it comes up on screen. Although it must be said that the pattern for Chris's live streaming on YouTube is relatively inconsistent, and it leads me to question something about it, because there's no real pattern, there's no real theme to the games that Chris plays beyond things he's sort of shown interest before, like The Binding of Isaac and etc. But it almost makes me wonder, curiously enough, that, well, it's kind of almost the same whenever Darkside Phil does a begging stream, as whenever there's a new event in WWE Champions that Phil needs to be involved in. Is it because, well, Chris needs the money, and is that the only reason why Chris is even bothering to do these streams at all? Because it's the sort of thing that there is a pattern forming in this in this sort of archaic form of delivering live streams. Just saying. Background. The channel's financial woes were caused by their own irresponsible behaviours. Chris, learning absolutely nothing over the years, well, like I said, a lack of precognition, has squandered any available money on children's toys, video games, fast food, and sex toys. Bob, on the other hand, was simply ignoring long-term debts and letting them pile up alarming amounts, armed only with vain hopes that her man-baby would raise money for her bills. Chris has made some efforts to generate income for the household over the previous few years, bar that of actually finding a job, which included opening an Etsy shop in 2015. However, any profits gained would immediately go straight towards toy purchases, an irresponsible move to say the least, that would turn out to be a recurring pattern that kept the channelers in the red. The shop would eventually shut down from Chris lazily not fulfilling Etsy orders, but he would still find some revenue from the occasional eBay sales of select merch from the Horde. To further compound the issue, Chris has been instilled with a very real belief that fans are willing to drop large sums of money into his bank account for nothing. An expectation that has since been strengthened by the $1,000 donation by D-Stex in September 2015. The object of this is that Chris was to do 100 pages for Sonichu, and Chris did 16 and basically quit after that. So it's not necessary. Well, it is. Well, you could say it's definitely fraud, because Chris did not keep up his end of the bargain. In September of 2015, this belief would take on the form of many begging videos that highlight the saga. Bob seems to have outstanding debts that dwarf Chris's financial handiwork. On September in 2016, she faced lawsuits from Discovery and Capital One for failing to pay the large amounts of her credit card debt. According to Virginia District Court records, it is worth noting that it takes a lot of ignored debt collector calls over a period of time to get a simple credit card debt escalated to a lawsuit, suggesting that Bob may have been outright ignoring making any payments to her credit cards. Only time will tell if more creditor companies begin to sue Bob for her neglect. In August of 2016, Chris revealed that the household is still under a mortgage of $115,000, introducing a far more worrying debt looming over the horizon. Both Chris and Bob continue to barely stay afloat with their lives thanks to their own tugboats. Despite it all, Chris did not once attempt to find a job. In April of 2017, with the household finances near the breaking point, one of Chris's IRL friends informed him of DARS, a service designed to help people with disabilities enter the workforce. Chris reacted with a temper tantrum, posting a multi-paragraph rant on not wanting to work. But Chris still wants people to donate him money. Can I just, again, slight tangent I have to go on, guys, in that, I've made, comments before about how because when I was unemployed and stuff like that back in, the early parts of 2015, 2025, I should say, I had a very detailed and a very critical, relation with, the DWP, because despite the fact that I was telling them more than willingly I was absolutely chomping at the bit to get back into work, despite the fact that I absolutely understood that, you know what, despite the reason why I was unemployed in the first place is that I underwent a massive breakdown and pretty much quit as a means of, well, passion, I suppose, because it was like one of those moments where I sort of like had to think about everything that was going on in my life. So it was, and despite I went to like so much, and I tried to explain to them how I felt, and that honestly, I didn't get the impression that they were particularly that interested about the fact that, well, at one point when I was actually in the job center and I was crying my eyes out, that I didn't really get the sense of, well, that their responses were particularly forthcoming for somebody who was in quite a vulnerable position. And the best thing they could do to me is that they put me on a 2-week course to like get experience in a contact center, or at least sit idly by trying to watch Zoom calls, take part in Zoom calls. And even this was during a time when my dad suffered a stroke. So between how I kind of just got the impression that there were people who were just taking the mickey out of me. And even when the course was all said and done and everything was over and I'd applied for the things they told me to do, and then they told me that I wouldn't be able to get my certificate in 6 weeks' time, I honestly felt that the only reason why they put me on that course in the first place is to make the work coach who I was under their supervision, just to make her look good. And whether I got anything out of it at the end, whether I actually was back in work, was irrelevant. You want to know why I knew it was irrelevant, guys? Because then she immediately asked me to do another 10-day course after it. So, and this is despite the fact that, again, I bust my arse off to make videos, I bust my arse off to make, to improve my skills, not only in art, like doing like digital stuff. It's kind of almost a reverse of what Chris's situation was, because Chris literally is too lazy and flies too off the handle to avoid doing anything whatsoever, but still whinges and complains about needing money to pay off debt. despite the fact that Chris will not even so much as think about that and prioritize Transformers and fast food, etc. I, on the other hand, I felt that the circumstances of my situation was that I was absolutely ready. I was more than willing. I was applying for job. I think in those 3 months I applied for over 200 jobs, and I didn't. got a response from like maybe 10 of them, and even the one I'm currently at was only possible because because of my brother's recommendation. I think it might be the only time so far I've relied on a my brother is a huge asset in terms of like reference material, and guess what? I like to imagine even to this day that, well, if it didn't happen, things would have just gone from bad to worse again. Why do I bother to mention any of this? Well, because there are resources out there, more who are probably openly willing to accept Chris, and even if Chris calmed down and legitimately thought about things logically, well, things might not have turned out this bad. But it's only because Chris is completely illogical, and there is no set pattern to what he does, and it's kind of a slap in the face for people who are more than willing to accept this help and these terms of endearment. It's like, do you guys remember when I talked about when I went in that open evening at Newcastle College, and one of the I talked to one of the organizers, and he talked about how he was actually wanting me to get back into to get work experience, and I told him whether I was in work over the next couple of weeks, even full time, I would still make time to do it. And he told me that, well, absolutely, and it doesn't matter if your circumstances change, because morally there's a duty to be had about you going out of your way to saying you're more than willing to keep up your end of the deal by working, and we don't want to discourage people from that. So hopefully we can find a way to work all of this out. Again, they use they use terminology like morally right, and they understand without knowing everything that I do and stuff like that, because they can clearly see, because of what I tell them, that I'm more than willing to do it. I never, and again with the DWP, I never got that same sense of mutual respect. Maybe that's also probably the reason why they put me on they immediately try to sign me up to another 10-day course. It's because they don't have any respect. Maybe they do, but based on the evidence of what? It's a good question, but I'm only listen, and bear in mind, guys, this is something you need to hopefully keep in mind as we go through this, is that there are probably hundreds, millions of people around the world right now who are also under the strain, and the sort of thing that financial cruelty and restraints have turned desperate. However, it has not broken their spirits. It has not broken their self-respect. They will do whatever they can. They will work godless hours and probably may never see their families for weeks at a time, if they can, if it means to keep them safe, and so that there's food to be put on the table. What does Chris do to earn his bread? What does Chris do to earn the respect of people, to know that Chris is responsible enough to care about what he does? Where are we meant to have seen any of that taking place? When Chris just willfully gave away $6,000 away for the sake of his imaginary fictional land? Is that the point we were meant to show Chris respect? Is it about the fact that Chris can't take care of his animals, let alone himself? Is that where we were meant to have shown signs of respect? I could go on, but if you generally think that Chris is somehow better than you guys, please bear in mind stuff like this, because it's a good reminder that, well, you if you think you're having it tough, at least you are fighting again. You are fighting the system. You are standing up to it. You know what? You may feel like the world is on your shoulders and that your knees are starting to buckle, but at least you're trying. You do far. You out there. You are probably doing far more than anybody is ever expecting of you. Anybody would ever expect of you, and you should be able to do it at this point for no one else apart from yourself, because you, my friends, are a credit to yourself, and you should be very proud of that. You should be very proud of who you are. You should be very proud of the fact that, you know what, things may look bleak, things may look desperate, but it hasn't stopped you, because nothing can stop you from trying. What is stopping Chris from trying? Nothing. The only thing that is stopping Chris from trying, in a sense, is the fact that for some reason Chris has completely given up trying, which is an attitude that is not only extraordinarily defeatist, it's something that I personally do not even like, because as an employer, why would I want to hire somebody who did not want to be there, but they'll still complain about needing money anyway? So one of these things is not like the others. I would say, before we move on, and I know I've ranted about this for a while, because I've talked to you, I said earlier that I've also applied for places that they said they would get back in touch, but they sort of just like pretended to fade interest. But what I'm going to say to you guys is this. Be respectful to yourselves before anything else. Show yourself that level of care and that level of authority and trust and kindness to yourself. Do that first by reminding yourself of who you are and what you know is right and wrong. If you could do that first and foremost, then you won't have anything to worry about. And you don't need me to tell you that. But I also feel like it's the sort of thing that nobody's ever told you guys for a long time, because nobody would give you credit. But that's possibly a story for another day, because you think, again, Chris may whinge and complain and whine about having it bad, but Chris doesn't do anything to help himself, because Chris's frivolous spending during the crises. Now, I should also point out, we also did a previous article on Chris and debts, which I think came out before this, so you may want to see that, because it kind of underestimates how completely irresponsible Chris is. Meanwhile, Chris's frivolous spending during the crises. Like any terminally irresponsible adult, Chris likes to keep his bedroom filled with toys, while keeping his wallet empty. Below is a list of the known expenses Chris has made during the Financhu crisis. Collected from online postings and eBay purchase history, some amounts are estimated, but all amounts are debilitating. During 2016, Chris was known to waste over $2,500 on toys. In late 2017, Chris spent a considerable amount of money to attend BronyCon. 3-day pass tickets were around $60, but money spent on travel, food, souvenirs, and lodging is around to be $2,000 to $3,000 by other attendees. Below is a list of known frivolous purchases made during the crises. There are doubtless many more that are not known about, including cash purchases, which will probably be very difficult to track, but this is something that probably should paint the picture in question. A new PS4 console, $540. About 30 game purchases for the PS4, $600. A $350 Ghostbusters Lego set bought on eBay for higher than asking price, $425.88. Transformers action figures, $587. Naru, a Dakimakura or a hug pillow, $90. Skylanders toys, $195. Pokemon merchandise, $181.79. Amiibo Smash Series Pit, $12.99. I'm Done Adulting t-shirt, $23.99. Lego Dimensions assorted sets, $238. My Little Pony themed card sleeves, $13.54. A 14K yellow gold Cleopatra bar 16-inch necklace, $399.99. Some would argue that that's because Chris did say he would get Barbara's necklace back. Whether or not this is the same necklace in question that Chris pawned, I'm not entirely sure. I'm sure it'll be referenced somewhere down below. Tokyo Treat Box. Minimum of $31.50 per month for 31 plus months. $976.50. Skylanders Avatar products for use as raffle prizes, $750. Doopy Do-Over artwork, $80. Hexbox 1, $400. A Hexbox Live Gold membership, $54.99. Hexbox Games, $89.94. Sonic Forces, $39.99. DNA Ancestry reports on Chris, Barb, and Bob, $500. And finally, God of War PS4 version from 2018, $59.99. Total, $6,267.09. In relative terms, guys, to give you an idea about what that looks like, it means that I would probably have to work at least 14 weeks in a row without spending money on anything else, just to waste all of it, like how Chris does. That sets a benchmark for people who it's to give you a perspective on people who work and, you know, who can barely get even that much in 14 weeks. But as I mentioned before, Chris is not working. So how on earth did he manage to do this? Well, that begs the question about why Chris refuses to work. You want money? Get a job. Well, that seems simple enough. Our response is that we are already employed by your boss's boss's boss due to our better and special powerful abilities. Is that how you put it, Chris? Therefore, all of you haterade-chugging get-a-job spouters out there, I suggest you shut up and enjoy your ability to settle in a cozy office or wherever. Chris clinging to his fantasies about the dimensional merge to justify why he's unemployed in the real world. Despite actively begging for money since 2016 and a near miss with foreclosure and homelessness in May of 2018, Chris has not attempted to get a job. Then again, the last job he's had dates all the way back to 2003. And whether or not you could call the Cutco Cutlery pyramid scheme a real job is up for debate. One of his real-life friends, a woman from his Pokemon club named Alexa, became concerned after seeing Chris repeatedly beg on Facebook. She suggested in November 2016 and again in April 2017 that he contact one of her family members who works at the Virginia DARS, a government service that helps disabled individuals find work. At the first suggestion, Chris didn't follow through, and at a second, he fired off a rant against getting a job, forcing Alexa to back down. In his rant, Chris gave the following flimsy excuses. 1. He was busy helping Barb and the pets, despite having no trouble in going on a 3-day trip out to another state without bringing them along in August 2017. 2. Trolls ruined his background check/reputation. While it is true that a Google search on Chris reveals unsavory details, they are only records of facts, and there are agencies that find work for slow-in-the-mind adults that would not care about minor crimes or indiscretions. unlike the major crimes that Chris would commit later on. And I don't know, guys, pepper spraying somebody is quite serious in my opinion. 3. Finding a job runs the risk of being discriminated against for his Tom Gold gender, which is absolute bullshit if you ask me, because it's discrimination in the workplace is a very serious offence, and if Chris actually raised any sort of concern whatsoever to the powers that be, then it's on grounds for someone to be sacked. And why Chris thinks that that's a bad thing, I couldn't tell you. 4. Stress. Not really explanatory, but then again, I suspect Chris has never really been used to the idea of being busy for 24 years. 5. He fears being incompetent. Well, don't be incompetent then. It would help Chris's cause if he actually bothered to learn or bothered to pay attention to things. Later, Chris added more excuses for not wanting to work. 6. In October 2017, Chris claimed that he was too busy with Quickville and his imaginary friends, in addition to helping Bob and the pets. 7. In June 2019, Chris claimed that he was already employed by God to oversee the dimensional merge. Most of his claimed responses hold no weight. Exactly. A background check, as explained by Jackie and Kim Wilson many times, only applies to legal records, and Chris's misdemeanors would not prevent him from getting a job. Fellow locals like William Elliott Waterman and Kenneth Engelhardt also have their names linked to their internet shenanigans, yet they have gained employment. Furthermore, discrimination on the basis of gender is illegal, especially as a result of a Supreme Court ruling on the 15th of June 2020. In reality, getting a job would probably reduce his stress over needing to beg in order to afford toys. His excuses for being fearful of making mistakes and his obsession over his imaginary friends are blocks set down by his own mind, revealing that, rather than growing up and assuming responsibility for his future, he would rather remain a man-child forever. Chris's only plausible claim was in May of 2018, when he feared that Weens and A-Logs will harass him at work, similar to how they harassed the management of the Endgames and Anytime Fitness into banning him. And finally, why you shouldn't donate to Chris. Now, I'm just going to say off the bat right away, and this is maybe something they'll mention in this, but it's a small thing, but it's the sort of thing that you should also be wary of. If Chris doesn't thank you for your patronage, then he's never going to do it. Because, please bear in mind, guys, even if you donate as minimum as $2, well, when Chris still had his Patreon account, if you donated even as little as $2 a month, Chris stated that you get no perks whatsoever, but thank you for your patronage. So, I swear to God, it is the equivalent of you having a $2 bill, Chris grabbing it, and then telling you to fuck off. Because it comes down to another thing, is that Chris has no concept of value. Not necessarily the value of money, but Chris has just no concept of value generally, for that matter. Anyway, let's get into the reasons why. 1. Chris has habitually neglected his customers. He has repeatedly failed to ship orders to his buyers on time, and will ignore messages from customers asking about their purchases, or give a myriad of excuses as to why they haven't been shipped. If he does get around to shipping them, his naive methods of packaging often cause items to arrive damaged. Other times, he simply won't ship items at all, as seen perfectly with his Patreon account. 2. If Chris is angry enough, he can use your information against you. This was infamously seen when Mr. Smith attempted to purchase a medallion from Chris, and, after Chris failed to make and ship one, filed a claim against him on eBay, causing Chris's PayPal account to be locked. Chris responded by furiously doxing Mr. Smith and another buyer on Facebook, both of whom eventually received prank calls from Weens. The information that PayPal releases to eBay sellers includes your full name, home address, email address, eBay username, and possibly your phone number. In other words, the exact kind of information you wouldn't want a screeching man-child to post in a public place when it's followed by hundreds of cannibalistic internet trolls. 3. Chris will piss your money away. As stated above, Chris and Bob have had a long history of irresponsible spending habits, which is the biggest reason why they've fallen into debt. Even if he does manage to ship something to you without any sort of hassle, or claim he won't spend your cash on toys, chances are still extremely high that Chris will immediately blow your money on Legos, action figures, video games, and all other stuff, and then immediately go back to begging, as though nothing had changed, although it wasn't even important enough to just do the right thing. Timeline. Now, what you're probably going to be noticing we'll be covering like the Financhu crisis in like stages, because honestly, trying to discuss the actual all the events is, well, it's a very long and difficult process, but it's something that I think is important enough because, well, it gives you an idea of just how long this has been going on for, and it will probably continue until at least 2031. If Chris is still alive by then. The future. Prior to Chris's arrest, Bob claimed $900 of Chris's tugboat each month to pay the active mortgage on 14 Branch Lane Court. The seriousness of the financial crisis, combined with Chris's impulsive spending, have led many followers of Chris to speculate on whether the passing of Bob will lead to financial ruin. Chris's future revenue, other than the monthly tugboat and fan support, is likely to be very limited, with some of his followers admitting that Chris will never get any kind of loan or credit. Even if Chris were to reverse his stance and try to get a job, nearly all potential employers would be unwilling to take on someone with little to no skills and over a decade of real-life and internet notoriety. Both the state of Virginia, and then again, there's also the possibility that, do you think Chris would be sensible enough to keep the details of his employment a secret? I doubt it. Both the state of Virginia, because, the trolls are nothing short of merciless and, well, obsessive. Both the state of Virginia and the US federal government have programs intended to help the disabled secure independent living. Most famous Section 8 housing, a number of followers have suggested that Chris should sign up for it, though these involve lengthy application processes and possibly several months of waiting. On the contrary, financial ruin may be a wet dream for A-loggers and weens, but it would be devastating for both Chris and many of his followers. The 2014 house fire caused a number of followers to doubt whether Chris will be able to cope with sleeping rough with little more than his clothes and medallion, especially after being pampered with toys and video games for many years. Homelessness would also threaten the steady supply of fresh drama that continues to attract new fans and followers from all walks of life and leave them wondering what will happen to Chris and what will he do. During Chris's stays in jail, not only would he beg for people to donate to his inmate account, but also beg for people to help pay off Bob's mortgage, and to have her relocated so he could move back in once he was released. However, there has been speculation that Chris has been placed into Section 8 Section 8 housing upon release. Whether or not his tugboat was suspended, the money cannot be garnished by the creditors, so as it stands, it seems that Chris may not be too worried about paying off his unsecured debt, as he has had more important things to deal with, and these things are I suppose. As for Bob, her debt is secured debt, while she's still paying it off with her own tugboat, considering she's been spotted at 14 Branch Lane Court as of recent as September 2024, it's very likely the house will be foreclosed once she finally kicks the bucket. Now, I would say that's sort of the end of it, for now, because this just gives you an idea of, a general overview, if you will, But then we also have to discuss, well, the 6 years that this has been going on, and even going on to this day, if we're going to sort of include 2024. But as I said previously at the beginning of this video, guys, well, if you think things are bad, at least you guys are trying to do something about it. And I do not need to tell you guys that you're doing something about it, because you're proving it yourselves, and you don't need to prove it to me, and you certainly don't need to prove it to Chris. You just need to do it for yourself, because you owe it to yourself. Unlike Chris. And you know why Chris does not owe it to himself? Because what has Chris technically done of value, and what about Chris's behavior and the things that he does would suggest that there's any level of self-restraint or self-respect or responsibility to showcase that Chris cares anything whatsoever for the damage he causes. Chris has caused nothing but havoc in the last 25 years, and it's hard to know what more Chris could do, or, well, there's probably a lot more Chris could do to cause mayhem, but the thing is, nobody really wants to see it, because, well, it's just another brick in the wall. And this wall is the wall of debt, one that is impossible to scale, and something Chris can literally not get away from. I say that even though Chris probably would shrug all of it off anyway, because, well, it's not important to Chris. But with that being said, I hope all of you guys enjoyed this overview of the Financhu crisis, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. So take care, and bye-bye for now.